where Gene Hackman, 95, and his wife Betsy Arakawa, 65, and a dog were found deceased.
Decaying flesh, the musty scent clinging to every bone, and an autopsy report heavy with details not for the faint of heart. Gene Hackman did not pass away from old age, nor did he depart in peace. Every sinew, every vein seemed to record his final story, where a heartbeat abruptly stopped in the quiet night, where prescribed pills turned into a source of harm, and where a hand, whether fates or human, intentionally or unintentionally, closed his life. The autopsy report even slightly lifted the dark curtain over Gene Hackman's final days, where truth and falsehood intertwined, creating a horrifying outcome. Hollywood may forget his glory, but the terrible details in this report will forever be etched like a curse, clinging to the depths of despair.
Security then checked on the residence and observed Mr. Hackman and Miss Arakawa on the ground unresponsive.
Gene Hackman's house had recently become chillingly silent. No one expected that beneath that peaceful facade, a haunting story was swirling in the shadows, waiting to be exposed. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa, two names that had once symbolized the enduring and peaceful nature of a late-in-life love in the glamorous film capital. However, when the police found them, everything in that small house had exceeded all notions of peace. The scene showed no signs of disturbance or violence.
A German Shepherd was also found deceased.
Not a single door was forced open, not a single window was broken. No shards of glass or bloodstains were scattered on the floor. Everything was impossibly perfect, as if time had frozen the moment they stepped into eternal silence. Strangely, both bodies had entered a state of advanced decomposition, a sign that they had departed this world several days before being discovered. But the most frightening thing was not the condition of the bodies but the absolute silence that pervaded the house. No emergency calls. No cries for help. No signs that they had tried to contact anyone outside. The phones were left on the kitchen table, fully charged, but the last call had stopped nearly 10 days ago. The unease deepened as investigators entered the small room at the end of the hallway, where Zena's familiar crate was located. The small dog Gene considered a true family member, Zena, lay in the crate, eyes closed, its small body curled up as if in a deep sleep. But the crate was locked from the outside. No one knew why. No leftover food, no scratches or signs of struggle. Zena's departure was as silent as its owners. But it was the first piece that opened the door to an unsolved nightmare. The investigation team's first mistake came from the seemingly smallest detail. They mistook Zena for another dog Gene had mentioned in an old interview. This error not only slowed down the identification process but also allowed conspiracy theories to spread across online forums. Some people claimed Zena had never actually lived in the house, that the dog was just a replica brought in to deceive someone or something watching the Hackman family. These bizarre theories grew stronger when information about the house being completely sealed was revealed. No signs of forced entry. No strange footprints. No signs of anyone entering or leaving for over a week. The house was sealed like a tomb. An unnamed investigator muttered as he left the scene, but even a tomb wouldn't be this silent. From the absolute quiet of the house, rumors of a silent curse shrouding the Hackman family began to appear. Some said Gene had accidentally purchased a strange item while filming in Japan in the 90s, and since then a series of silent tragedies had followed him. Others believed Betsy, who was extremely sensitive to the spiritual, had often felt an invisible presence around the house, especially after Gene's 90th birthday. However, they always chose to remain silent, as if they believed that by not mentioning it, everything would dissipate like fog under the sun. But fog doesn't easily dissipate, especially when it has seeped into every wall, every tiny crevice in the house. 9 days, enough time for legends to fall into silence. And in those 9 days, the story of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa gradually turned into a haunting legend, where every whisper could be true, and every dark corner held a piece no one dared to touch. The misidentification of Zena initially seemed like a minor scratch in the entire complex case surrounding Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa. But as the investigation deepened, the pieces became clearer. It was not just an oversight, it was a clue. The first bone of the skeleton of truth buried under the murky mud of theories and unspoken obsessions. Zena was not a mere pet or companion. It was a small soul tightly bound to Betsy's every breath. From the early days of living with Gene, Betsy had brought Zena as an inseparable part of her life. There were moments when Gene joked that Zena was Betsy's true partner, while he was just a bystander watching those two small souls journey through the years. Yet, when the house door was breached, Zena lay motionless in its small crate, locked from the outside without a sign of resistance. No howls echoing through the lonely days. The anomaly didn't stop at Zena's inexplicable isolation. In the house there were traces of 2 other dogs, loyal creatures of the Hackman family. But strangely both were healthy and roaming freely. So why was Zena singled out and locked away? Who locked the crate? And most importantly, why did no one hear any sound, even a faint bark, signaling that something terrible was happening? The time gap between Gene Hackman's last contact with the outside world and the moment police broke down the door, 9 days, was not just a number. It was a chasm where the final hours of 2 people who were once icons slipped into darkness without a trace. No witnesses. No one remembering those 9 days. Neighbors heard no strange noises. They assumed Gene and Betsy were simply enjoying their usual privacy. No parties. No guests. No signs of life abruptly stopping. This raised a significant question. Why didn't anyone notice their absence for over a week? Gene Hackman was not only a living legend but also a man with an almost fixed daily routine. The newspaper delivery person didn't see him pick up the paper. The postman bringing mail didn't get a response. But no one really suspected anything. The prolonged silence was as if the house had voluntarily sunk into a layer of quiet mist. No one breaking through, no one touching. The answer perhaps lay in the cell phone found on the kitchen table, fully charged but the screen locked. No one but Gene and Betsy knew the passcode. When electronic forensics experts intervened, the last conversations between Gene and Betsy gradually appeared, but not in a normal way. Messages stopped abruptly at 10:17 p.m. on Saturday night. No farewell messages. No goodnight wishes. The chat ended with a short sentence from Betsy, typed hastily in the message box but never sent. "It's in the house." Just a few words, but heavy as a stone weighing on the hearts of those who read them. The question arises, what was it? Someone, or something, invisible? Who, or what, had infiltrated their safest space, a place Gene once called sanctuary, a private sanctuary that the world couldn't touch? Next to Gene's phone, an old photo was found, a photo of 3 people, Gene, Betsy, and a stranger. Strangely, the third person's face had been scratched out, as if someone had tried to completely erase his presence from the house's memory. No one knew when the photo was taken, nor did anyone understand why it was placed next to the phone. Investigators whispered to each other that some houses, after their owners leave, close their doors but still retain their sounds, memories, breaths, and shadows in every wall. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's house was not one of them. It held nothing but absolute emptiness, as if those 2 souls had been swallowed, and every sound, every trace that once existed had been erased by someone, or something. The misidentification of Zena was just the beginning. Behind that door, everything was waiting to be told, but not through human words. Through the echoes of the walls that witnessed the entire nightmare. "It's in the house." That short sentence was never sent, but it became the first key to open doors that shouldn't be opened. Doors leading into a bottomless darkness where 9 days passed like a broken dream. No one knowing where the beginning or end was. No one in the Santa Fe County forensic team could forget the morning of February 27th, when the 2 bodies were transported to the morgue under a dark, sealed tarp. Gene Hackman's name was marked on the bag, alongside Betsy Arakawa, the quiet woman who had been with him for decades. The transport personnel spoke in hushed tones, as if the very air around those bodies was whispering untold stories. No one laughed. No one made jokes. That cold atmosphere clung to every corner of the room, where whispers from the beyond echoed silently and persistently. When the cloth was pulled down, the entire room seemed to freeze. Gene Hackman's body, the man who once strode majestically across Hollywood's red carpets, now bore an inexplicable strangeness. His hands, which had held the Oscar statue in his most glorious moment, were now contracted, as if clutching something in his final seconds. But even stranger was his skin, not purple, not pale, but a dark golden brown, as if every finger, every toe had undergone some mysterious embalming. Not the stiffness of cold frost. Not the charring of heat. But the color of a body drained of life force by an unseen hand. Betsy was no better. Her feet, which had walked beside Gene through life's many paths, were now contracted. The toes were etched with tiny cracks. The decomposition process was unusually rapid but focused only on the limbs, while the torso strangely retained its original structure. The forensic team was perplexed. They had seen bodies left unattended for months, but never a form of half-hearted preservation, both brutal and sophisticated, like this. The next puzzle, no signs of violence. The skin on the chest, neck, and shoulders, areas that usually record signs of struggle, was completely smooth. No bruises. No scratches. But when the gloved hand of the forensic doctor gently lifted the skin of the lower abdomen, a discovery silenced the room. Dark bruises scattered irregularly, as if beneath the skin were bruises that appeared for no reason. No external impact. No collision. No falls or beatings. The bruises appeared like invisible imprints of something that had crept inside, touched every tiny blood vessel, and then vanished without a trace. On the dining table in the Hackman's kitchen, where the bodies were found, prescription drugs were scattered. But what puzzled investigators was not the quantity of drugs but how they were arranged. No bottles were hastily opened. No pills broken in half. Sleeping pills, sedatives, painkillers, all were intact, neatly arranged as if an invisible hand had carefully organized them after the nightmare began. Initial tests found no signs of overdose, no narcotics, no ethanol in the blood. No indicators to conclude a common drug overdose. The only confirmed fact was that Gene Hackman's heart stopped on February 17, about 9 days before the bodies were found. But the actual cause of that heart stopping? No forensic doctor dared to confirm. No myocardial infarction. No pleural diffusion. No coronary artery blockage. Gene Hackman's biological clock stopped without any warning bells. When tissue samples were sent for toxicology analysis, bizarre theories began to surface. Slow poisoning? Biological agents? Or something never recorded in any forensic literature? Carbon monoxide tests were absolutely negative, completely ruling out the possibility of gas poisoning in a confined space. So what had entered those two bodies, silently and ruthlessly drained their life force, and left them in the very house that was once their sanctuary? Public opinion began to clamor for answers. Wild theories filled the headlines. Some believed in ancient curses. Others suspected the intervention of an underground organization or a top-secret biomedical program. But amidst the noisy clamor, no one knew that beneath the discolored skin, inside the congealed blood vessels, Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's bodies were whispering their final story, not in words, but in traces no one wanted to believe, no one dared to understand. In the hazy light of the 70s, when Hollywood was still a magnificent maze filled with smoke and strong liquor, Gene Hackman strode between the light and dark sides of the film capital. He was hailed as an immortal icon of American drama, the soul of vivid stories where each character he portrayed carried a part of the real soul of the man behind the camera. But few knew that behind that halo of glory, Gene Hackman had seen corners that not everyone could survive to tell. In 1983, after the success of Under Fire, Hackman quietly withdrew from the nightly parties in Beverly Hills. He turned down invitations from renowned directors. Even cut off contact with some friends who had been with him for 2 decades. When asked why, he simply sipped his drink and said, "Some things are better left alone." No one dared to ask further. And from then on, Gene Hackman, though still appearing on screen, became an enigmatic figure in Hollywood. A man with a warm smile but always keeping his secrets to himself. Betsy Arakawa, the woman who entered Hackman's life when he was weary of all-night drinking with old colleagues, was not quite the innocent flower many imagined. Few remembered that before marrying Hackman, Betsy had been involved in a shady financial investment related to a chain of shell companies in Los Angeles. Unexplained funds, unnamed investment contracts, private parties with major film producers, all appeared in Betsy's personal financial records from 1982 to 1985. But when Betsy officially became Mrs. Hackman, all traces of that past suddenly vanished, as if an invisible hand had carefully removed each piece from the puzzle. The death, or rather, the strange passing, of Gene and Betsy should have become the focus of the media. But strangely, a collective veil of silence covered those who had worked with Hackman. Directors who had won awards with him. Actors who considered him a mentor. All avoided the cameras when reporters approached. Some even left Los Angeles as soon as the news about Hackman broke. That silence, to those who understood Hollywood, was more terrifying than any rumor. Deep beneath the front-page news and conspiracy forums scattered across America, a name suddenly resurfaced: the Pact. Rumors of a silent pact among stars of the 70s and 80s, those who had crossed the thin line between art and dark power. It was said that the pact was born as a secret agreement among stars who knew too much about parties that no newspaper dared mention, about directors who built their careers on backroom deals, and about money laundered through not one but dozens of intermediaries. Gene Hackman, according to some documents revealed on underground forums, was not just a witness but one of the last living witnesses of the pact. The films he participated in during the late 70s were not just works of art but also a cover for shady transactions behind the scenes. And Hackman knew too much, too clearly. That was also why he quietly withdrew from the entertainment industry, choosing a secluded life with Betsy and their dog Xena in a house nestled in the Santa Fe Valley. But it seemed that no matter how far he ran, the shadow of the pact followed his every step. Even when Hackman left Hollywood, unnamed calls and unaddressed letters continued to arrive at his home. Betsy once told an old friend that every night she saw Hackman standing by the window, quietly looking out into the night as if waiting for someone to knock. And when the last light in that house went out, people knew that the pact had finally found what it needed. But the mystery didn't stop there. If the pact really existed, who was behind it? Who had the power to control the icons of Hollywood? Enough power to make the entire film capital bow in silence before Gene Hackman's departure? And most importantly, did the pact's real secret go to the grave with Gene Hackman, or was there someone out there holding the final piece? Because Hollywood, no matter how glamorous, is just a stage. And behind that stage the real figures are pulling the strings. Gene Hackman's death, from a certain perspective, was perhaps the perfect ending for a cinematic legend who had walked through all the glitz and shadows of Hollywood. But for those who knew him, especially those who dared to delve into the years Hackman quietly disappeared from the screen, this was not just a death. It was a signal. A warning hidden beneath the guise of a personal tragedy. Hollywood chose silence. Brief memorial services. A few bland condolences from former colleagues. Those who had stood shoulder to shoulder with Hackman but now refused to mention his name more than 3 times in an interview. No lengthy eulogies. No profound reminiscences. The Oscar statues he had touched were now quieter than ever. But out there, social media was not silent. The mysterious deaths of Hackman and Betsy ignited a storm of conspiracy theories, spreading like a virus into every corner of the internet. Every theory, from the outlandish to the chilling, had its believers. Some swore that Hackman and Betsy had been eliminated by a biological assassin using nanotechnology to stop their hearts without leaving a trace. Some forums dug up classified files, accusing Hackman of knowing too much about powerful parties in 70s Hollywood, where life and death deals were sealed with blood and secrets. It was called the Pact, an agreement among stars who knew that their fame and lives were separated by a thin thread. Another theory, equally thrilling, delved into the strange death of Xena, Betsy's loyal dog. Why did only Xena die while the other dogs remained healthy? It was believed that Xena had seen what it shouldn't have. A being not quite human had entered the house on the night of February 17th. A dog's eyes, more honest and direct than any camera, had recorded that stranger's image. And Xena's death was no accident. It was the elimination of a witness. Betsy Arakawa, the woman who had spent her life hiding in Gene Hackman's shadow, now became the focus of every theory. Was Betsy really just a quiet wife? Or was she the linchpin of the entire mystery? Shady investments. Secret financial transactions linked to unnamed entities in both the US and Japan, all led back to her. The woman who seemed to have nothing remarkable except an unfinished piano piece. The final lines of the autopsy report concluded with a chilling statement. Cause of death, cardiac arrest of undetermined cause. No evidence of direct external force. No common toxins detected. It closed on paper. But out there, the door to the hell that Hollywood always hid had just been slightly opened. Independent investigative reporters continued to revisit Hackman's unfinished projects from the 80s. A film that was never released, about a secret organization controlling the lives of A-list stars, had its funding pulled just before filming began. Hackman withdrew from the project, left Hollywood, and never mentioned it again. Betsy's financial records. Calls erased from phones. Mismatched biological traces found in the house. All became pieces of a jigsaw puzzle with no final answer. Perhaps Gene Hackman and Betsy did not choose this path. They did not choose to become the new dark legends of Hollywood. But once they crossed that line, no one had a choice anymore. Somewhere in the cold house in Santa Fe, Betsy's wooden chair still faced the window. A strange white light still appeared at 3 a.m. as if someone, or something, was waiting for the secret door to open again. And this time it might not just stop at Hackman. Ultimately, the final chapter of Gene Hackman's life was not closed with applause or heartfelt eulogies from Hollywood. Instead, it was written in the cold lines of an autopsy report, where each detail opened another door into a labyrinth of chilling truths. There were no signs of struggle. No cries for help. Only absolute silence pervading the space. Everything in Gene and Betsy Arakawa's house was preserved to an unusual degree, as if someone or something had meticulously orchestrated every final moment. For a man who spent his life portraying flawed heroes, individuals struggling between light and darkness, Gene Hackman himself departed in a story without a clear villain or specific crime. All that remained was a creeping sense that an unseen hand had arranged this ending. An ending so cold that even the most seasoned investigators shuddered.